Hi everyone, welcome to our curator talk for the expanded drawing exhibition. So I just want to say hello, my name's Bex. I'm one of the directors of Air Gallery based in Altrincham, and we're helping sponsor the whole exhibition that'll be happening in October.
My name's Alan. I am an artist and curator and director here at Air Gallery as well. And I have been working collaboratively with Jason and Jay to put on this show. And yeah, we're really excited about launching this, and we're just going to be talking about the exhibition. Right. Okay, so the purpose of this meeting is just basically to give some background and concept about the up-and-coming exhibition. So we've gone with the Drawing Beyond Itself as the title, and this kind of idea started from basically me and Jay and Jason were working collaboratively on a drawing project together, and we were thinking about kind of when we were doing these drawings together, we were thinking like, what are we actually trying to achieve with these works? And what happened was we were talking and talking, and it was more about the conversation. And we thought what would be interesting is if we did an exhibition that almost shows drawing, but different ways drawing kind of gets into other different practices. So it could be drawing and painting, drawing and sculpture, drawing and performance, and seeing what other artists explore those different mediums together. So a little bit about my practice. So I'm interested in sculpture and drawing, and I'm particularly interested in how they kind of coexist together, or how sculpture can also be seen as a drawing, or drawing can be seen as a sculpture. And with my kind of area of interest, I find those two they link kind of in simultaneously together, especially when I'm making and I am experimenting with different objects and different materials. I can kind of do this in this way. I don't want to go in too much in detail with kind of my concepts and ideas, but I hopefully will talk more about that during the rest of the outline of the show and the talk. So I'm going to pass you on to Jay and Jason, and they're going to talk a little bit about their practice, because they've actually got works in the show, and they are going to basically talk about the concepts. And because Jay's got a very keen interest in drawing with his practice, so if we ask Jay to go first, and then we can shoot from there and create some kind of conversations.
Yeah, I'm just going to start by introducing myself. So my name is Jay Oswalt. I am a fairly recent year out fine art graduate from Manchester School of Art. I'm also helping Alan and Bex out with co-creating the show that's coming up in October, Drawing Beyond Itself, as you may know through the VR show currently happening. And I'm also a frequent collaborator with Jason Gillen as well. If I just quickly ask Jason to introduce himself as well, I don't know if he can be unmuted. There we go. Yeah, and then I will talk a little bit about my practice, if that's okay with you, Jason.
Yeah, so me and Jay met at art school on the fine art course at Manchester School of Art. We've had a sort of friendship and a kind of creative partnership across that time, collaborated on various projects, and always had quite a sort of healthy, interesting dialogue. And like Alan mentioned, we then sort of did some collaboration with Alan, and yeah, very much the conversations that we've got quite different practices in many ways. But yeah, the nature of the conversations we had were really interesting. So there was definitely something to tap into in terms of drawing. Yeah, I think it's a very flexible medium. So I think it's something that from our unique approaches, we've been able to, yeah, come up with some interesting ideas around. But yeah, I'll hand back to you, Jay, and then talk a little bit later.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but we've had quite a a long 3-year friendship, but it's also been quite a sort of what I would say sort of like conversation, as Alan mentioned earlier. This is more or less conversations we're having around fine art and drawing and that of painting and sculpture also, but I'll get onto that a little bit more when Jason talks about his practice too. So if I just quickly start off by saying that I do have a very keen interest in drawing, also a very keen interest in fine art in general, but I'm also sort of very passionate about it, and I'm trying to, what I call drawing research, trying to navigate different ways that artists are using drawing in their practice as more of a medium specific. So a bit about my practice. So at the moment, it's a year out, trying to reevaluate, rethink my art practice, but I'm sort of leaning towards drawing as more of like science and language in relation to the creative mind. But I suppose to try and work and make amends of habit, repetition, and sort of the idea of understanding what drawing is. I mean, it's the idea of like, you know, it's a tool for understanding the world around us, for navigating, not just within the fine arts also. So I think it's quite interesting in that sense. I also feel there is a lot of what I call temporality in drawing, and it kind of captures thoughts and ideas rather effectively. Also, it could be used for sort of as the preliminary steps, I suppose, before an artwork. I think it's really important to emphasize the idea that drawing is also a way for an artist to navigate their thinking before they make it. So, for example, a painter might, you know, have a sketchbook beforehand, or a sculptor might do the same thing. And this kind of came about through a quote by Henry Matisse. He said, just to paraphrase, that on his essays on writings on art, to draw is to outline an idea. The drawing is the clarification of thought, and follow on to the end of that. And I quite like this, and I think it's quite fitting. And Jason and Alan might agree with me because they both draw in their practice. A work without drawing is a house without a framework. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is that it's important to remember that behind every artwork there might be this medium specific in drawing that doesn't get shown. So I suppose what this show is going to do, or hoping this investigation in drawing is going to do, is to show some of those artists that are dedicating those 2D works, and maybe through painting and sculpture as well. But yeah, I'm going to pass you on to Jason now, because I think he has some interesting ideas on that too.
Sure. Yeah. I'll give a brief summary of my practice, because I come from a slightly different position. My practice is generally it's a bit more about painting, really, especially expanded painting. So that's kind of exploring different notions of how to relate to the surface of painting, different set of materials. Generally away from the conventional canvas and oil paint. And collage has one thing that I think's kind of relevant to this, is that collage has got quite a big influence on my work, and collage is quite an expansive medium. So it's really all about that kind of overlap between different areas. So taking sort of cherry picking elements from different disciplines or different areas of art and seeing how they can be combined. So this kind of idea of like the hybrid to me is something that's very central. And I think a lot of the artists in this show demonstrate that. It's as if I think we wanted to pick work that authentically had a footing in drawing, but it seemed that from a lot of our conversations we felt that a lot of really interesting sort of contemporary drawings also have this sense of it belonging to another discipline whilst exploring drawing. So that kind of overlap or kind of intersection of different areas is something that I think really comes through in the show. Alan hinted at some of like the wide range of works we have in that show, and it's from sculpture, text-based work, performance, painting, sculpture, and so for me that I think that kind of almost collage way of thinking, something that really influences my work, is that looking at how two things can be kind of put together, and then there's a synthesis, you know, and something interesting can occur there. So yeah, for me, architecture's, the drawing I have in the VR show is heavily influenced by architecture. And it was a process of kind of thinking about the modular elements, so drawing through a grid and working to and from the idea of like modeling architecture as a representation, but also going between that idea and then the surface of the wall, so the physical supports of architecture. You know, it was a back and forth of translating, between the two. So that's a kind of new series of drawings for me. So it's also been really exciting to have these conversations and to, you know, investigate some of the artist's work and then let that feed back into stuff I've been doing. So yeah, I think we've got a really great bunch of artists that we've managed to select, and I think we've all been quite impressed with the caliber of a lot of them. And yeah, it's definitely this sense of a dialogue, this openness, I think, to the show is quite refreshing, because drawing seems to have, that kind of flexibility, and I think, like Jay sort of hinted at earlier, it sort of underpins or kind of bleeds into other areas. So it seems to me that, you know, as people start to look at other mediums, they kind of learn something about drawing, those other mediums inform drawing, and then it's a kind of two-way street. And I think the show demonstrates that really well. I mean, should I talk about kind of how we went about selecting the artists, or? So that was, I think early on it seemed to be quite important that we didn't want to just include anything, which sounds a bit daft, but it became a question of how do you define what a drawing is, and that's quite problematic when you start thinking about that, because it's not as straightforward as you first imagine. And I think we decided that we felt like if an artist could kind of demonstrate that there was a genuine interest and concern with some of the ideas, at least, that underpin drawing, if not the materials, and if they could demonstrate that, and we felt like it was quite authentic, then almost anything would go. And so you know, it might be someone like you know, Greg Bourgogne, who's very experimental using video work, and it might not immediately appear as a drawing, but the longer you spend with it, you kind of understand that he's actually doing something quite interesting through like performance. So there are loads of examples and sort of surprises, I think, within the show. And then there are some that maybe have a bit more rooting in, you know, the traditional surface of paper and kind of graphite and charcoal, quite basic means. So I think it's striking that balance between something that definitely felt like drawing still, but also something that was pushing the boundaries a bit, so that we could really show the kind of contemporary take on drawing now, because it's very, you know, hence why we've referenced expanded drawing. It's such a rich field, and it, you know, drawing obviously has developed beyond the surface of paper, you know, into all these areas. So yeah, I think there'll be some, for people that come and see the show in October, there'll be some pleasant surprises. And I think we haven't gone with like a singular narrative. I think there are lots of relationships that will emerge between the works. And so, that sense of a conversation of different things happening in the space. I think it's definitely one to come and see.
Yeah, picking up on your point there, with the idea of creating a dialogue and that there being not one set narrative in the space. Mm-hmm. That's one of the things we want to try and do with the exhibition, is we want to generate many conversations about drawing, because it isn't just one subject area, because it's expanded into other fields. We want to try and bring up all those different conversations between the sort of crossovers between disciplines. I mean, I'm coming from a curatorial perspective, so I'm not a drawer in any sense, but I do primarily have the curation, the admin, the funding side of things. So I'm very much interested in the actual exhibition, in the narratives, in the dialogues, in the conversations and the relationships that the artwork has to the public. So my role within the project is primarily going to be on that side of things, sort of liaising between the general public, the artists, and ourselves. So with the open call, we've had so many works that came through, didn't we?
Oh yes.
It was incredible the choice we had to pick
Yeah.
from. So that was quite a challenge narrowing it down, because there was a lot of really good artists that we would have wanted to have put in the show. However, due to space limitations we have here, we could only keep it down to a small number. But if this is something that is really popular, it may be something that we then take to other locations and that we might redo as another exhibition in the future. And we probably would include more artists as and when we're doing that. I was going to mention, with obviously with the whole COVID thing that's happened this year, this exhibition was due to actually be earlier in the year, in April. We have put it back now to October, which worked quite well for us, mainly because during this October they normally have the big draw event that happens, so it's a little bit more relevant with the time frame. It's also given us a bit more time to actually talk with the artists, to work alongside of them. I know Jay and Jason will probably talk a little bit more about this, but they have been having conversations with the artists, and you will see some of those in video blogs and audio blogs and just normal Q&As appearing on social media very soon in the next few months. I also want to say, before we continue, I just want to thank Arts Council England, who helped sponsor part of this project. So they are actually helping us pay artists to do some of the vlogs that we are going to be presenting to you. So thank you, Arts Council.
I am going to interject here. I know it's not we didn't schedule this, but I thought maybe we could talk about some of our favourite works in the exhibition. If you two are all right with that?
In the VR one?
In the VR one.
VR one.
We'll talk about it in the VR one, because that one's live. Okay, so I mean, one piece of work, or three pieces of work, which I'm really excited, and I think they're absolutely amazing. Becky's going to help me with the names, because I totally forgot the names. We have three text works in the exhibition.
Yes, by Liz Collini.
By Liz Collini, and I think these are literally the pinnacle of the exhibition. Am I allowed to say that, guys? No, the reason is, I think they're pretty much like, we talk about drawing being a universal language, and text writing being like a drawing as well. I was having a conversation with one of our studio residents today, and I was saying to him, this exhibition is more about seeing the actual the finished product as being the drawing, I suppose, because I know drawings come leaps and bounds since that. And he's a sign writer, and I was looking at his signs, I was thinking, your drawings of text are actually really, really good. And there's elements of drawing, and you've got to think of it as like a drawing, I think, personally. Her work is my favourite in the exhibition. I do like the works of Simon Woolham as well, because I love the fact how he's he's showing this journey through simply just what's the word, frottaging, I think it is.
Yeah, frottage.
And recording that journey, but then he brings it back to his studio, and then he changed the whole the landscape of the work, I suppose, the whole
he's almost like recording the landscape within his work, and then he dissects the drawings up and almost creates a new landscape out of these recordings. So it's quite an interesting, almost like circle going rounds.
What about you guys? Who would like to go first, maybe talking about some of the work, maybe? Jay.
I was just gonna quickly go on what you were saying really quickly, Alan, if you don't mind, about Liz Collini's work. The relationship between drawing and language is a universal one, but it's also an interesting one, because writing and drawing seems to have this overarching and parallel lap, if that's safe to say, but they do go hand in hand, and it's one of those things that you learn to draw before you could read or write, and yet drawing seems to be has been in contemporary art history this very low art form, especially before the 1960s, of graphics or comic books or newspapers or commercial printing or journals or sketchbooks or very art school sort of basis before you do anything else kind of thing. Here's a sketchbook, sit, draw, get it out of your system. But it does still get graded, but it's not the finished product. So I feel like I completely agree with you on that. The writing aspect does fit really well within the show. Yeah. So I also wanted to say my two favorites in the show so far have been Emma Coupe. Emma Coupe's work is, I feel, is in my opinion, quite a fragile perspective on drawing. The two sports services she uses is kind of strikes me a little bit, which is the survival blankets used, which is kind of like an aluminium foil, and she presses crayon on them, which is quite almost a strange thing to do. And then she rests them and then puts a fan on it. And in just a bit of context, her work relates to nature and the sea, so it's kind of, they remind me, if it's safe to say, V.J. Clemens' work of intricate drawings of the sea. And I just think some of those works are fantastic in the show. And on the VR one as well, I think it's on rice paper, which is quite a strange sports surface. You kind of associate drawing to be on a sort of like very commercial piece of paper, A4 sort of in the frame. So that's one of my favorites. And my other favorite is Ella Fradgley's work. I think that's how you pronounce her last name. I apologize if I've got it wrong, Ella. And I've been following her work for quite some time, and it's not the finished product of her work that it's obviously they are aesthetically fantastic and very small and quite intricate drawings, but it's more the process of how she, if you follow her work on Instagram, the process of how she goes about it. The context, I feel, is quite interesting. It's to do with the mind, and I think there is something really this, I don't want to use the word mindfulness too loosely, and trying to bring it back to drawing as best as I can, but the act of drawing is something that I've been quite interested for quite some time, and I feel like Ella's work sort of hits nail on the head of that a little bit. I think the kind of the slowing and that kind of rhythm that her work has, and I think her work is fantastic as well. So I'll pass you on to Jason to let us know what he thinks.
Yeah, you've picked sort of two of my favorites, I think, as well, but I'll try and mix it up so I don't look like I'm copying you. But yeah, I was going to say, I think I've definitely we've known Ella's work a bit from being at the art school at a similar time, and yeah, for me, I feel like her recent work I prefer a bit to some of the older pieces. I think what's interesting from how I see it is that she's done some work now with acrylic paint. So she's obviously previously done a lot of mark making with sort of pen or more sort of drawing based media on paper, but she seems to be working on MDF at the moment with acrylic, and I kind of like that transition now. Like they're displayed on the MDF, they sort of sit in the painting territory a bit, but then completely are drawing. So there's something about those that kind of blurring of boundaries that I find really, really interesting. And like Jay said, they're really beautiful pieces as well. But yeah, for me, that was quite an exciting advancement. I think as soon as I knew they were on MDF for me, suddenly I became a bit more excited about it. And I don't quite know why, but I think it's because it seemed to sort of like slip into the territory of painting. And then, yeah, Kevin Boardman's work, actually, I was really surprised. He seems to be, maybe it's his sort of interactive arts background, but the work that I know we're having in the main show is really, really different from the work that he's submitted for the VR show. And that was a nice surprise. And I think in his statement, he talks about how he's sort of come to terms with with his approach, where he's not tied down to any sort of style or kind of media. It's really ideas led. So he lets himself kind of follow his instincts or whatever he's finding interesting at the moment. So he's got some works that are based on the tiles that he must have seen in Victoria Baths. And they're really just quite intricate kind of study of surface and like the history. Maybe there's a link with Simon Woolham there, the idea of kind of the history of a surface. yeah, translated through drawing. I think there's just something very sensitive and kind of yeah, maybe sort of quite humble about them. There's something that maybe sort of stops you in your tracks, and it makes you pay attention a bit. So I think that's a work I like, and I like the positioning of those next to Ella's. Actually, I think there's some works that feel quite quiet and in a good sense, you know, and there's some that maybe a little bit brasher, a bit maybe either larger in scale or just a bit more forceful, but there's kind of it seems to be even in the VR show, like a nice difference in rhythm between some of the works. Yeah, and it's nice seeing, you know, we've kind of dealt with all these images previously and all these artists as kind of separate entities, and now even starting to see it in a digital format of actually putting them side by side. I think it's feeling like the ideas we had are actually kind of coming to life a bit, and you can see these relationships emerging, which I think is really good. But yeah, and Emma Coupe is really fascinating as well, and yeah, discovering that rice paper really starts to make you think, you know, I really want to see one in the flesh now, because you imagine that you'd almost maybe breathe on it and it would float away or disintegrate. So yeah, I think like with all these things, you really got to see them in the flesh as well. You know, obviously but you know, most of these works are really material based. So yeah, it's going to be exciting to see them in the flesh for us as well.
There we go. Yeah, picking up on that actually of seeing things in the flesh, I was actually going to mention about Naomi Kendrick's work, because I've been following Naomi Kendrick for quite a few years now. I've actually had the privilege of seeing her performances at Blank Space and at Federation House a few years ago now. And I know she's done performances at Victoria Baths, and she basically uses her entire body to draw with. So it's very fluid, it's very expressive, but it's almost like pushing the boundaries and limitations of the body as well as drawing, which is one of the things I really like about her work. In particular, with the VR show, there are the two pieces on the huge pieces on the very first space on the back wall. One of the pieces is actually drawn under hypnosis, which again, I kind of like that idea of almost like the control is being taken away in a sense, and it's becoming much more fluid and much more expressionistic. But while still also being a drawing and a record of her movements and her distance and travel through this sort of state of mind. Another artist as well that I really like in the exhibition that we haven't mentioned yet is Elena Suez. Hoping I'm pronouncing that right. Primarily because she works a lot with, she's done one piece in the show that's cyanotypes. There's kind of like a photography crossover with her work, which is something that I'm personally interested in. But I just like the way that the final outcome of these. I know cyanotypes are quite challenging to actually do and get a clear contrast. So I can appreciate the technical skill that's gone behind that. And there's something really interesting about this idea of drawing with kind of chemicals. It's almost like a different take again on drawing. And yeah, I really appreciate kind of what she's done and the effort has gone into creating that particular piece of work.
Okay. I'm gonna like go on something that Jay said. Sorry, and I kind of agree with what you were saying about kind of like it's a lot of the works in this exhibition are more about the process rather than the final outcome. You know, the process is a lot more interesting, and with Ella Fragiley's work, it's all about that kind of slowing down and that kind of repetitive kind of mark making that is almost like, you know, you could spend time just like sitting on a train and just like you just let your hand just make the marks and then seeing how it evolves from that. And the work I think is absolutely fantastic. I think it's really phenomenal. Mm-hmm. Would anybody else like to say anything about the works or any other works or anything to?
I think it's worth saying, I mean, I feel like really proud of everyone that we've got included. I mean, obviously it was quite a hard selection process. So the artists that we've chosen, you know, it's not all the artists included in this VR exhibition, but you know, when it comes to the October one, I mean, you wouldn't want to let go of any of them really. So yeah, I think it feels like a really strong collection and so diverse as well, which we did set out to do, didn't we? Kind of really think about what contemporary drawing is. And I feel like we've ticked a lot of boxes in that sense. Yeah, so it's yeah, you know, as you reminded me of some of those artists and your favorites, it's kind of, you go, oh, well, that, yeah, actually that as well. It's quite, it's hard to pin it down, but yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree with Jason on that one. I'm really happy with the selection so far. But also what Jason said as well, like the diversity of the works is something was quite challenging to try and like make sure that we weren't just saying that, you know, drawing is the most important art form. I mean, all art forms come in their own way, or this umbrella of different things. As you know, drawing isn't any more important than painting, and painting isn't any more important than sculpture. Maybe they're all important, but I feel like the emphasis of the show is to try and capture a experimental sort of gatherings of what these artists are up to. Why are they doing these works in this medium in this way, which is quite, so that I like to use investigation in the show. And just to quickly mention the small drawing project me and Jason are doing at the moment, we're trying not to think we already know what we think we know about drawing. You know, we're kind of doing an investigation in some ways into, you know, giving the reins to the artists a little bit, and maybe learn something from them, or vice versa. And I think that is going to be a key element in October, I hope, when we have people that we can maybe hopefully distance socialize with about these things.
Yeah, is it worth maybe talking a little bit about the running alongside this, that we've been in contact with the artists, talking about the kind of Q&As and things like that? Yeah, so it was a bit of a, you know, obviously an awful situation with COVID, but it was a bit of a blessing in disguise, in the sense that we've had a bit more time, because we always knew we wanted to ideally have a publication that would sit alongside the exhibition. And yeah, the situation that's happened has given us a bit more time to think about, you know, actually starting to, since conversation's so important, actually reaching out and doing some sort of Q&As with artists. So we've set out to do that, and we've had like a really good response from pretty much all the artists. And yeah, we started to do Q&As. Some of the artists have decided to do kind of like video vlog style or audio works about their practice, and sometimes they're taking sort of taking that into their own hands and doing that. And then other times we're doing a kind of back and forth Q&A, and it's been really good to kind of burrow down into each artist and look at their previous works and start to kind of formulate some questions. And I think we've both sort of found that once you start spending some time with the work, you've got loads of things that you want to ask about it. You know, it's obviously the work has a kind of a physical material existence, that, you know, something that you see, but there's so much behind it. And I think that's with drawing as well, there's a lot of questions that come to mind. So yeah, we're kind of weaving that in alongside, and ideally we'll have some sort of publication if we can get that done. If not, we've got a load of sort of digital content. But yeah, I think it's that conversation kind of happening now as we go towards the exhibition. It feels like it's not just a kind of finalized thing in October. It's something that could either, you know, could still run beyond it. And yeah, with the drawing collective thing that I know you're going to talk about as well. It's nice to see these things kind of moving together, I think.
I agree, Jay. I agree. Some very interesting conversations are happening between us and the artists at the moment. Yep.
So now, as Jason's just mentioned, we are launching a drawing collective. It's called the Northwest Drawing Collective. And this at the moment is a website. But what we would like it to be is obviously a website full of interesting artists who explore drawing and combine it with other mediums, but also be a platform for them as well. So they can look up kind of opportunities to do with drawing, and they can funding, for it. And we would also like it to be a chance for people who work with drawing to meet one another and to kind of create kind of conversations and come together to talk about their work and to create some kind of interesting dialogues, you know, and maybe create more collaborative projects like we did, you know. What else is on? What else?
Yeah, so as well as there being art opportunities and funding on there, we are posting a resource pack. So there'll be links to other websites of interest, links to videos of different kind of drawing techniques if people have never drawn before, just to get them interested in drawing. And we've posted up a guide on there of all of the different art galleries and exhibition spaces and studios in the Northwest. So once that goes live, which should hopefully be tomorrow, if anyone has been missed out on the list, just give us a bell and we'll add you onto it. Basically, we've created a huge art map of the Northwest and we're just adding places as and when we go. And yeah, as Alan mentioned, there will be artists on the website, so you can read some information about them. They will all be involved with the expanded drawing exhibition in October. And we will be opening up the opportunity for more people to get involved with the collective during probably October, November onwards, with the view that any new members will then become part of the team and we can look at future exhibitions together, and group crits and tutorials and just general meetings in pubs, hopefully, if COVID lets us.
I think drawing, I mean, in terms of kind of like what Jay was saying, you know, we're not saying drawing is important, but we're looking at it as a starting point as well as a, you know, finishing point, I suppose, like in kind of people's work, I suppose, like why do they do these kind of certain things? And I think we've got a lot of really interesting artists involved with it so far, and we're looking forward to launching it and getting people to, you know, getting people involved.
We've got 10 minutes left, and I thought I was gonna suggest something. We could always cut it out if originally, due to technical difficulties, we were gonna do a live version of this. So I thought, why don't I ask Alan and you a question about drawing, and the same with you, Jason. I think that'll be quite a nice way to end it, quite relaxed. So Alan, I know you draw within your practice. How do you feel the relationship between you and the medium of drawing is? Do you feel like it could go into painting or sculpture, or do you feel it's the medium that gets you excited, or is it the finalized result, or is it the process of leading up to a drawing? How do you see drawing within your practice is what I'm asking.
Right. Well, I'm kind of like, in terms of my practice, I am interested in so much. Like I could see my work. It starts off as a sculpture. My work does. This is what I've been doing so far. So my work's been starting off as a sculpture, but then has evolved to a drawing. But I'm kind of seeing like how it could evolve even further. So it could maybe evolve into an animation, or it could even evolve into another sculpture, you know, that could abstract the drawing or the original sculpture. So for some reason, I tend to work in kind of almost like circles with my work. It kind of always kind of comes back on itself from what it originally supposed to be. Some music in the background. I mean, I have an interest in taxidermy, and I've trained myself how to do taxidermy, and I've been thinking of some ideas and to do with that, and thinking about how that could kind of maybe be coming to a drawing, and the because obviously using kind of skin as a material, and skin for many years was used as a drawing, was used to draw on. So there's kind of that kind of connection with things. So yeah, I kind of see my work evolving, and kind of like I can see it becoming something else kind of afterwards, which could also be a little bit more exciting. What was the second part of that question? Was there a second part of that question, Jay?
I think you've answered it quite well. That was really good. That was very nice. I think the other part of that question, I feel like, how important do you feel the medium of drawing is? Because it's graphite based, your work, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Well, I suppose it's. I mean, being a sculptor, like I don't see it being important, but obviously, like recent years, I've started like drawing and considering the drawing being the final product of like, and of course, my drawings. If you go onto my Instagram, they're quite. It's almost like when you draw something, you kind of don't draw it in how it looks. Really, I mean, I don't want to be a photographic realist drawer, but I tend to do it quite photographically realistic. And I like the fact is that when you put it onto a different surface, the surface almost becomes a space in itself. So the paper kind of becomes almost like an extended gallery, if you like. So I see the sculpture it becomes a drawing, but then it almost exists as a sculpture in the actual space itself, which I find quite interesting.
Brilliant.
All right, mate.
That's great. Jason, do you want me to fire away with my question?
Yeah. A different question or?
Different question.
Yeah, go on then.
Are you ready? In the hot seat. Okay. So as we said before, we've known each other for quite a long time, but your interest is within painting, and we always seem to have conversations around drawing when I mention it, and then we seem to have really interesting conversations about painting when you mention it. So it's kind of almost like table tennis match of different medium specifics. But I wanted to ask you, how do you feel drawing fits into painting? Not just within your practice, but painting in general. How do you feel? Is drawing important in painting, or can painting exist on its own? And going back to, without repeating myself, the Henry Matisse quote, and I know you've looked into his collage works before and you've used that. He said, a work without drawing is a house without a framework. So I suppose my question is, where do you feel drawing sits in painting, if at all?
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. I was gonna, as you started to ask that question, the first thing that popped into my head, that's what's quite interesting. I think in lots of ways, as you sort of turned up to the art school as more of a painter in lots of senses, and then your work sort of transitioned into drawing, and I in many ways turned up having basically spent most of my time drawing, and then actually kind of moved into painting. I'd say it's hard to. It's a good question, but it's quite a hard question to answer. I mean, it's quite hard to. My relationship with painting is, I feel like an affinity with the idea of like expanded painting. So it might be very different for someone who perhaps is very sort of canvas based, slightly more traditional perhaps. I think how to go about answering that. I mean, I feel like, most good artists have had some sort of grasp on drawing, and it's been important for their, for their visual development. I think you'd probably find that there's a common root in whatever way, painters or artists sort of execute their work. I think a lot of what they've learned will have actually come through, periods of observational drawing, or just that kind of sort of rudimentary, ability just to translate something you see or experience into a set of marks, on a surface. I think it's something that everyone sort of moved through, and that's it's important for artistic development. I think in terms of, I mean, I think definitely if you're considering a painter that is perhaps working in a kind of sort of realist style, the drawing element then is quite clear to see. Really, it's that that like negotiating with reality and how to kind of lay that down on a canvas is always going to involve an element of drawing. I think for me, I've been quite interested thinking about thinking about my degree showpiece, and a little bit like Alan was mentioning, I was really interested in architecture, so I started to look at architectural plans and blueprints, and that's a set of very much, drawings. They're drawings for a certain purpose. I think they're quite sort of like aesthetically beautiful, but they're not particularly designed to be so. They're very functional, and they're a certain translation of three-dimensional space. So again, you have that kind of back and forth. You have the idea of, you know, designing something that's going to be physical, you know, sculptural, and you know, maybe that idea of framework that you hinted at, but then also being able to kind of translate that into a flat floor plan or design is interesting. And so my work kind of took, for my degree showpiece, it took some of the blueprints for the art school, and there was sort of the shapes and how I kind of laid out. I was using sort of thin strips of sandpaper that were fixed directly to the wall. So as a sort of translation of three-dimensional space, the architecture of the wall, and then a kind of sculptural painterly relief. So that back and forth that Alan mentioned, I think definitely interests me. And I think just drawing seems to have that flexibility where you can look at a set of drawings and they can be taken anywhere. They can be taken into sculpture, you know, and then there's a reverse thing. You can kind of go backwards as well. So it's a hard one to answer, and it's very, I think it can be very personal, you know, like you mentioned, we know painters that will kind of sketch out an idea for an image. You know, some people work more in the idea of maybe sort of images, and then sometimes it's more about, you know, I'm very interested in, like, also with a lot of the sandpaper works I made with the idea of like gesture. So that kind of idea of mark making can kind of fluidly move between drawing and painting. I think it's just a sense of a different tool or material, but yeah, drawing definitely also has that primal link to the idea of making a mark, which I think situates it maybe at the key of you know, at the core of a lot of art practices, just that leaving a trace, you know, and you see that in the show as well. I think people have their different way of doing that, you know, and it relates to different things. I don't know if that completely answered your question, but yeah.
Fantastic answer, Joe. That's great. Thank you. No, that was really interesting. Very, very interesting. But yeah.
Yeah. I'll try to come up with a question for you then, actually.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, maybe sort of two questions. I'd be interested to know your kind of transition from painting to drawing, how, whether you see that as actually, you know, a lot of what we're talking about is, we're not saying everything's completely divorced from each other. There's a overlap. How do you feel about that experience from kind of working more with drawing, moving from painting? You know, what happened there? And then, yeah, maybe to sort of sum up, how do you see contemporary drawing today? You know, especially based on the artists we've chosen, and if you could do a sort of summary, maybe.
Yeah, I'll keep it short. That's an interesting question. How did I come from? So just a bit of background behind that. I did a part-time foundation at Brighton City College, and the tutor there was painter-based and a printmaker. So a lot of my material resources and context was heavily painterly driven. And then I don't know what happened. I think I gave up and I couldn't do it. I don't know. Basically, I don't know. I think by default, and the freedom of not knowing what to do in the studio, go to university, doing a BA and find out for the first time, you're left with a lot of, not in a bad way, just a lot of freedom to sort of explore. And I feel like a lot of my time was spent either in the studio or in the library. So it was more or less a testing ground. So every time I'd come up with an idea, whether it related to nature or whatever the context was at the time, ended up as a drawing without realizing. And I think it came to the end of second year and I had too many ideas, too many things going on. I wanted to do this, wanted to do that, and I just couldn't get my head around what. And I think a tutor said to me, just as a kind of as a joke, why don't you just throw a dart at your list and just pick one? I didn't want to do that either. I was like, I don't know what to do. I was like, well, okay, drawing seems to be the thing I'm doing the most in sketchbooks. It seems to be the thing I'm doing the most in my journals. It seems to be in my lectures. It seems to be everywhere I'm going. It seems to be there. So I just honed in on it, narrowed it down, and the research came along after. And I know it's not as mysterious or as grand or as interesting as hopefully the question answering the question is meant to be. but it was simple as that. That's why I kind of refer to it as drawing research, because I'm at the point where I'm more interested in drawing today and the contemporary aspects of it. To the second point to your question, Jason, is that drawing goes back, since the dawn of time, really. The kind of the cave paintings, and they're known as cave paintings, and it was the first, we don't know if it was the first one, the hand where red pigment blown onto the cave wall. Is that a drawing? Is that a painting? Is that what is it? And I don't think, I feel like the specific of the medium is important, because the fluidity of art has become a little bit blurred in the last 50 years or however so many years. So I feel like drawing today kind of slows down the artist's thinking. It kind of, even if you don't use it as a medium, I think the best example I can give of this is that I found out quite recently that Jackson Pollock drew before he painted, which is quite bizarre. And he called them these psychoanalytical, don't quote me out, sorry, psychoanalytical drawings. And he was kind of doing these squiggles with ink. And that they're very different. They feel very sort of personal. You could see there's a thought process. Whether they relate to his 4 paintings or not, I couldn't tell you. But that's the best example I can give of why I feel like drawing is important today in terms of those aspects. It helps, I feel, and it's not something that needs to be tucked away. I feel like it's something that needs to, there could be philosophical ideas behind this. I couldn't tell you, but that's why I think. I hope that answers your question, Jim.
Yep, perfect.
Great.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Shall we close the meeting to an end?
Mm-hmm.
We've got some last minute things. What was the last minute
Yeah,
thing?
so when we post this video up, we're going to post links to the VR exhibition, the new Northwest website, people's Instagram, so you can have a look, just in case if there's any artists we've mentioned in this chat, just so you can check out their work, so you can know what we're talking about if you've not had a chance yet to see the VR show. We will keep you updated on social media with updates of our October exhibition, so please do follow us at Air Gallery on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, and at the Northwest Drawing Collective on those social platforms as well.
Just a quick thank you to all the artists involved with the VR show, and I hope you're all looking forward to the actual exhibition in October. And another thank you to Jay and Jason for
Thank you.
collaborating with our project. It's been really fun and interesting, and I feel like this is only the beginning, and we can go a lot further with this. As Jay's mentioned, we're hopefully going to be doing a publication, and I'm quite excited about working on that with you both, and which should be interesting. And yeah, let's see what the future brings, and let's get some artists into a space and talk about drawing.
And thanks for everyone who's tuning in to this video chat. We'll hopefully see you all soon.
Thank you.